Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney, and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 200 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question. I'm hoping the guests' explorations, musings, curiosities, and experiences will prompt your own inquiry into what this question means for you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 81st episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Patrick McAndrew. Patrick, a global thought leader on productivity and performance, empowers professionals to escape the productivity paradox, the illusion that being busy equals progress. As founder of HARA, an inner circle for exceptional entrepreneurs and leaders, Patrick equips individuals with practical tools to reclaim their focus, boost productivity, and achieve extraordinary results in a world full of distraction. He provides teams with tools to tame distractions, prioritize what matters most, and ultimately develop resilience. In this episode and this beautiful conversation, Patrick takes us on his exploration of various cognitive and biological functions to what is now a journey to the heart, moving from fragmentation and mechanistic approaches to life towards greater alignment, embodiment, and a sense of being. He shares beautiful anecdotes and wisdom observed from his mother in her final months and his experience of caring for her, as well as the realisations he has also made in his own closely examined life. He touches on various modalities that he has explored to live a more connected life, as well as tools and perspectives he shares with his clients to allow greater acceptance and connection to flourish in their own lives. This episode has a lot to offer. Whether you are seeking greater clarity in your life, have implemented many processes for, in air quotes, optimizing your life, but still feel that there is something missing, or knowing that something intangible feels within your reach, but you feel lost in that process. This episode will offer multiple insights and experiences for your contemplation. Look, I hugely enjoyed this conversation with Patrick. I think he's got a wonderful mind, and I think he shares so many fascinating insights into his own journey towards a more heart-led existence. So I think you're going to take a lot from this conversation. And if you enjoy this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, please continue to leave your lovely reviews, as it greatly helps me at this stage of my podcasting journey. Please check out the show notes below if you want to see more of Patrick's work, whether that's his website or his newsletter. And you can also find the link for this podcast newsletter, in which I share my reactions and reflections, or for what these conversations that you're listening to, for what they evoked in me. And so that's all I have to say this week before this week's interview. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you again next week. So without further ado, the 81st episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Patrick, thank you very much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Since speaking to you last, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for your time today.
Yeah, likewise. I'm so glad that Pat connected us and that we're now in each other's orbit.
Exactly, my man. So look, the first question, as I always kick these off with Patrick, is the question of, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
Yeah, at the moment and for the last while, it's been very much related to connecting with myself. I think there's so many sort of layers that can be unpeeled as you keep moving through that. I was thinking about it last night that I think the whole craze and obsession around saunas and ice baths at the moment are getting at that very thing. They're getting at some sort of a little taste of what that experience is, that when you feel that cold inside your bones, but you're going to stay there, even though you're getting all the signals to leave, but you're deciding you're going to stay in it for longer. Or you go into the sauna and you're feeling this sweltering heat that you need to leave, but yet you're deciding, I'm going to stay in it and I'm going to experience what the rest of this is like. There's so many more layers that can go deeper and deeper underneath that. And I've sort of exhausted a lot of what other people can offer me in the experiences that they can provide me with. And now I'm just left with no more books have the answers. No country or culture or shamanistic ways I feel have the answers. And yeah, now the question is really, who am I? Who am I here? in this moment, and what am I really connected to? Where am I really living this life from? And that's an internal question that when I put external or vocal words on it, it doesn't even sound as strong as it is internally. Well, within me, it's a strong question, and it's been a guiding question probably for many, many, many years. But up until about 6 months ago, I thought that somebody else had the answers. I thought something had the answers, some place, some tradition, some way. And in the last 6 months, I've come to realize that it's not out there. Nobody else will be able to provide me with some sort of a passage or experience or chunk of wisdom that will give me what I'm looking for. I simply just have to turn my attention inward and ask the questions of myself.
This is, this is what is a good life? Who am I? They're kind of, two behemoths in themselves, I guess, or two unfolding questions or evolving questions, even what we may perceive an answer to be to them at any given point in time. Could you give me a sense of where this question has kind of taken you from, even to the point now where you're like, okay, look, it's not another culture, another process, another book. There's something that's deeply personal about this question for me, and where a sense of it may even reside.
So where is it taking me now? Is that the question?
And even from where is it taken you, I guess, as well.
So originally it took me into my mind, thinking that there were answers I needed to get, or there was a lack of information and knowledge, which was probably true. So that led to a ton of reading um, about more mechanistic aspects of myself. So the mechanistic aspects of my mind, of my hormones, of my mood, where my emotions originate from, etc. That could only take me so far. I felt like I was a mechanic who knew how the car operated very well, but didn't know how to drive the car. So then I had to let go of all of that knowledge of the mechanistic ways that my body and my mind function, and I had to lean into more self observation. So that led me towards yoga. It led me towards silent retreats. Led me towards those were two kind of primary containers. Seeking out people that were wiser than me, who had gone further along the path and the journey. My mother's passing led me towards much deeper and bigger questions. Also, watching her and seeing in the last 8 months of her life the amount of burden that she released, that she had been carrying throughout all of her life. And I saw the weight of that. And I saw the lightness in her once she started to release all of the the dynamics that can often exist between her and herself and her and others, family members, past traumas, wounds that hadn't been healed. And when I saw that she actually started to confront those, I saw this lightness, this almost this youthful beauty that started to come through in somebody who was going through an extremely terrible illness, which at her body she was getting thinner and weaker, yet there was a sort of light that was coming through in her eyes. There was a joy that was coming through in her energy that I hadn't seen in a long time. So then after that, actually, I ended up back in Ireland for 8 months in my own isolation, being back at the home that I grew up in, but all of the familiar things were gone. The friends were gone. The neighbors were different. There was different people around. The town felt different. The town that I knew, that I left. My mum was no longer there. My sister was no longer there. My friends were all gone. So who was I in this space? So these sorts of things had to be questioned. Then you get into the phase of like I'm being driven to make money and make an impact through my work, but the impact that I'm longing for is more of an impact within myself that I can share outwardly with others, as opposed to trying to make an impact on other people's lives so it will reflect back to give meaning to myself. That's sort of the way I was going, and I realized that as I earned money and as I got great reflections and feedback from people about the work that I was doing, what it was offering to them, it wasn't filling me because I wasn't turning my attention inward on myself, on seeing what was really longed for here. So we went from the mind to let go of that to move into the body. Exploring the body helped a lot, doing a lot of movement practices. And I feel as though the final frontier now is the heart, which is a space that I didn't really give much attention to at all throughout this journey. I didn't acknowledge, I didn't really appreciate nor recognize what the connection is between the mind and the heart, and when you can integrate that, what you can get from it. So that's where it's taking me to now. And that doesn't look like anything. In truth, it has no specific form. There's no series of reps that I need to get in every day. There's no training plan. I don't know what the outcome is. It's an open curiosity and exploration of trying to uncover things within myself. Because what's driving me there is because I know that something is missing. I know that I found all of these distinct parts of myself, and now I'm trying to find some sort of a unity between them. So there might not be as much efforting or action that needs to take place. Perhaps there just needs to be a lot more observation and awareness of seeing how I can bring these elements together. So for somebody who's hearing this, that might just sound so esoteric and abstract and nothing doing. But in fact, it's the most challenging part because I don't have a mental framework to operate through. All the other parts had some sort of a conceptual framework, but I recognize that the next phase needs to be about letting that go and literally being drawn towards what the heart is being drawn towards, bringing a lot more love and acceptance uh, into my search of myself.
And that was such a beautiful answer in so many different areas. I don't even know where to go next. The first part that I'd just like to touch on, and only go with it wherever you want to, but just even that perception of, or the impact of that observation of seeing your mother in kind of a sense of youthful exuberance. What did that kind of give you in an instinct for, or what did that kind of suggest to you in terms of even reflecting it on your own journey?
Well, there's that. And then there's the moment of meeting the body after it's no longer alive. Those two things, when you contrast them side by side, they offer immense teaching. I was her primary carer for about 8 months, really it was. But for the 2 weeks before she passed away, I wasn't there. That was the only real passage of time where I wasn't with her. I had to come back to the States for work. And during that time, she was on the way up. She was recovering, and when I left her, we were talking about, because we were in Mexico through the whole passage of her illness, but we were talking about taking salsa dancing classes together when she came back, and there were these boat trips that she wanted to go on because we were in Puerto Vallarta. All sorts of things were being discussed of what was coming now that her energy was coming back and she was getting stronger, and she had stage 4 cancer that had spread to many parts of the body, but she was starting to put on weight. It looked like the cancer was regressing. But then while I was away, she got ill. And in like 3 or 4 days, everything deteriorated. So I think I was in the security line in JFK with my sister, because I was trying to rush back, but my sister had told me that she had passed. So then I had to take a night in Mexico City, and then the next morning, I got to Puerto Vallarta. And in that arriving to the room, I knew that she was going to be in there, and I had no sense of what my response or my reaction was going to be. And then when I went and saw her in the casket, there was sort of no feeling between her and I. There was just this sense of seeing, wow, this is what it looks like to see when the life and soul is left the body. So I ended up sitting on the ground beside it, because I realized I couldn't connect to her by staring at the body. So I wanted to reconnect with her by feeling what the feeling was like to be in her presence. And from that, all of it felt like it just washed over me, of this feeling of this love, this joy, this exuberance, the feeling that I would have whenever I would see her and give her a hug. And I was able to reconnect to what I was seeing in her before I left. And that taught me a huge amount, where my sister and I then spoke about that for sort of the rest of the day. Like, what's going on here? Like, we can still feel her. And that feeling of being able to tap into feeling and connecting to her lasted for about 3 weeks. Over 3 weeks, it got progressively weaker and weaker and weaker until it felt very hard to connect to in the same way. But I say that because I saw the weight that was being lifted as she was letting go of the burdens that she was carrying. And as she let go of that, I saw this youthful exuberance coming through her. Even though physically she was getting more and more sick, something was becoming more and more light in her. And then when I saw the body, there was nothing. There was no resonance. There was no connection. There was just an acknowledgement that that is my mother and she's no longer here. That was like evidencing the fact. It was sort of creating some point of closure, which is why I can understand it's so important for people when somebody dear to them has passed away, why there's so much pain when you don't get to see the body, because you don't get to visually get the evidence of closure that they've left. But the huge teaching that came from that is that the mental stories that I tell myself about why I like or love somebody and why I dislike or don't or even hate somebody has nothing to do with the mental stories I tell myself. Those mental stories come from a deeper feeling inside. They come from the fact that I feel some sort of a resonance to this person. And then I try and evidence why I feel that resonance then when I have to explain it to somebody else. Never when I feel it in myself do I have to say, oh, I love them because of this, that, and the other. I just feel it. But when somebody says, what does your mother mean to you, or what does your partner mean to you? Well, it's because of this and it's because of that. But those words never truly get at the very thing itself, because it's a felt experience. The same is true, I believe, when we don't connect with people, when we dislike them. It's because there's this incoherence between them and I. There's something which isn't fully lining up. And that experience with my mum allowed me to really experience that. And that helped me in recognizing that those who I didn't feel a connection with, or I felt a block towards, I didn't really allow myself to almost believe the stories that my mind would tell me. I just went searching for what's in them that I don't feel this kind of coherent connection to. Or on the flip side, if I felt a real draw to somebody, it's not about the external representation of them. It's not about something in their persona. There's something that's drawing me toward them. So what is it? What's actually drawing me toward them in this space? And yeah, I think that whole experience like just brings an easefulness to life, because it also means that if you don't like me and if you don't get me, if you're not interested in me, if you reject me, I really, it's something that's in relation between you and I. It's not just me. It's in how you are perceiving me. It could be between us. It could be solely in you. It could be solely in me. But you know, somebody certainly in their teenage years will think that I have to keep changing my personality, my look, my ways, how I present myself, the clothes. And that adolescent kind of nature can live in people who are 60 or 70. It doesn't exist just in those
Absolutely, yeah.
teenage years. But I feel as though I got freed from that massively in the experience of having that, with that time and that passage and observing the life and the death of my mother.
Man, that's absolutely gorgeous. And I love, I don't know, for the way you're describing it, to me, it almost like points to even just that very essence of being that seems eternal or something, like in the sense of even the youthful exuberance, just when I'm hearing it, you know, like, the other part I think is so true. Like, it's never even personal, even if somebody doesn't like me. Like, I've been convinced of this recent, like in the last few years, where it's just like, it's almost like when a dog smells another dog and there can be instant conflict. Like, and it doesn't mean that it has to be super aggressive or anything like that, but we just, I don't know, there's something about it. We don't have to spend so much time in trying to convince somebody or ourselves of something that just isn't there as well. And like, I don't know, I think that's quite liberating to even just acknowledge that. And more to your point, then, even in comparing that to kind of an adolescent sense, it means we don't have to like try to bend ourselves in every which way in order to gain that temporary approval from somebody else, which I also think is a beautiful observation. The thing you
Yeah.
were saying, oh, go on.
No, I was just going to say in relation to that, that like something that I am seeing from some friends, from some men, but this is predominantly in the sphere of men, is there's a huge engagement with understanding the sort of evolutionary biology of how we connect and relate to one another. So the mating and the pairing, uh, the social, I think it's the socio-sexual hierarchy. Somebody sent me an article on recently. Then there's a friend of mine who speaks a lot about intrasexual competition, how those dynamics play out. Um, the certain kind of, and then there's another friend that I have who has all of these sort of categorizations of men, the alphas, the bravos, the gammas, the omegas. There's so many there. And I think all of that is true if you exist at that level of your perception of seeing things that way. But I really think you can free yourself from all of that by seeing the much deeper sort of game that's being played here.
Yeah.
And those men that I'm friends with, that I see who engage in life in that way, they keep trying to evidence the categories that they have in their mind. They keep trying to evidence the mental frameworks that they've created to make life a little bit less confusing. And I just think that way of engaging in life is so limiting, in truth, because it's highly comparative. It's highly about like distinguishing between where I am in this hierarchy and this game in comparison to the man across from me, or where I am in this hierarchy in this game amongst the men around me, and what that is going to do to attract or influence the woman that I want. And I'm thinking then about her perception and the intrasexual competition between her and these other women and what their deeper desires are. And can you see how that becomes so incredibly overwhelming that you have no sense then of who you are within your own life, within your own environment, your own internal landscape? You are only seeing yourself as a pawn within this chess game that is this evolutionary construct of life. Now, it's very easy to like map out the evolutionary construct of life when you distance yourself from the true nature of life, because you watch the games that are playing out between people. And it's true. I don't deny it, that there is absolute truth in that. So I don't belittle it or deny its validity, but I just bring this up to raise the point that that expression of what I'm getting at with my mum and what I saw was that she released so many of those constructs. How I should be, how they should treat me, how I should have been seen, how I should be respected, and where I was not heard. And as those things got to be released, she brightened up, and she suddenly was able to move through life and the harrowing pain and suffering that she was going through and really receive it. She stopped taking painkillers because she wanted to experience the pain itself. And, I just say this because that is about sort of letting go of the very mental driven framework of trying to understand life. And this question of what is a good life, it's sort of like an internal dialogue with yourself, that as soon as we actually bring it out in what's happening between us, we actually get a much more compressed and reduced version of it. It helps, and it can offer some guidance and some insight, but the real story that's being told is the one that's happening inside of you that nobody will ever hear. And when we engage in that, we sort of get freed from these constructs and these complex mental viewings of what life is about and how to succeed and how to win, etc.
But when you were saying that there, it made me think of an experience I had maybe 6 weeks ago. There's a guy in my local area that I'd often see and would just sometimes say hello to each other, but we'd never had a conversation. And while he was queuing up for a coffee, my baby girl just interacted with him a little bit, to the point then that I was sat down and he was stood up and he was just a yard away from me. We'd said hello so many times, so we were just going to say something. And what I ended up saying to him, and it was in German as well, was almost the second sentence that came out of my mouth was Ich mag deine Ausstrahlung, which basically means I like your vibe or I like your energy, something like that. And he got his coffee then and proceeded just to ask me, could he sit down beside me and my daughter then? And we had this is a Saturday morning, probably 9 o'clock, like not many people out and about. And just that simple connection between us, like I'm 6'4", I think he's a similar size. So that thing you're talking about, especially sometimes amongst men, like that you can kind of get a sense that someone's putting you through a series of metrics, as you say, to see where you may sit or stand in something. But I just love how certain things, like we think all these things are real until you do one thing or there's one act that just cuts through it all so quickly, to the point that he and I are just having a wild conversation around life, love, meaning, expression, whatever, without a hint of pressing up against each, or testing or anything like this. So I think what I'm coming to understand in so many of just life experiences is this sense of, and even as you're pointing it through the observation of your mother's experience as well, like there's ways past this. There's ways of letting go of this that I think they're far more, what makes me quite optimistic, I think they're far more at our fingertips. It's not about this, deconditioning and going through almost the same mechanistic process, and one by one letting go of these. I love this idea that you mentioned as well in a few moments ago, this like realizing that the heart is the last frontier. And that for me is, as far as I perceive it, that is almost like the journey, or that is almost the experience or the integration. Because, and I don't know, I'd like to even hear, maybe as to you were alluding to before, just this mechanistic aspects that you were in kind of going through and absorbing lots of intellectual information and processes and things of that nature, and how it contrasts with the present moment, in which it feels less about a to-do list or a checklist of experiences. Because I think that's almost the thing that gives us that's the thing that releases the fear almost of that letting go. Like that's what is almost. Just curious from your perspective, the sense of what even allowed you to to start to think, okay, these mechanistic process, they've served me to some degree, but now there's something else. There's another frontier.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what kind of brought me there was my weaknesses. Was a lot of weaknesses that I saw in myself. I think there's something exceptional about going out and trying to chart your own path, whether you're an artist or you're trying to do it as a business, as an entrepreneur, or I mean, it can take many different forms. It can take the form of being a mother and choosing now that you're going to take care of the family and the home, or a father who's going to do the same thing. It can, that is sort of like this choosing of this path that I'm going to take because I feel called toward it. It can take a number of different forms. But as soon as you do that, you sort of get confronted with all of the things that were hidden in the background. And that that has been that has probably been like the continuous through line in all of this, because when I started the first business, the Bowery Common, which was an audio marketing business in New York City, I was just useless in many ways. Like that's how I felt inside myself anyway. Um, I was certainly trying to survive, trying to get by, trying to make this weird idea that I couldn't really articulate very well to people to spawn into life. And I was just completely taken by my impulses and cravings all the time. So I was my own biggest obstacle. I could see the thing that I wanted to bring into reality, but the hardest part about getting there was actually orienting myself towards that direction, towards that path. I kept I kept bringing myself away from it. And a lot of that was, like I said, through impulses and cravings, through literally needing to sit down and get something done. And I would just be on my screen or looking at the news, the sports, YouTube, social media, or feeling a craving for a coffee or some sugar and then going down and getting that and saying, once I get that, I'll feel better, or going out and knowing that there's something important, but maybe drinking the night before and then that disrupting the very thing that was important to me the next day. And um, that made me turn more toward understanding what was happening here. But then maybe I fixed myself to get the tasks done so I could become very focused and a very good taskmaster, very good at producing. But then where was I in that? I was becoming mechanistic because I only viewed myself through a mechanistic lens. I wanted to understand the mechanisms of how I functioned. And if I could understand those clearly, then I could make myself more mechanical. I'm so grateful that I did that because it was a really important passage to move through to like fine tune and hone those capabilities. But then came the next thing of trying to find clarity. That was the hardest thing. Was like, okay, I can do a lot of stuff, but what's the thing that I really want to do? What's the thing that's really important to me? Couldn't seem to find that. Couldn't seem to find what was genuinely important to me because now I had earned the money that I wasn't surviving. There was no more debt. There was none of these issues. But what was I drawing from next? So becoming more mechanical, becoming more driven by my wearables of what my Oura ring was telling me, or my Whoop strap, or the very blood glucose monitor, those things helped in my performance, but they didn't help in my guidance through life. Not at all. In fact, they detracted from it. So then I had to find ways to connect with some sort of internal conviction. And that's then what sort of started to lead towards the path of meditation and hatha yoga, qigong. Um, then I came up against an inability to fully express myself, not feeling that sort of frustration. So that led me towards the path of dance, to feel more fluid and open in my body. And by doing that, then I felt more free and flowing in how I interacted with others and how I allowed myself to show up. And then from that point on, okay, I have all these things, but I want to be able to rest within myself. I want to feel because I would get these tastes, these moments of feeling like I had just found my deepest best friend, which was myself. But they would last for moments, and they never got fully integrated to be there with me as something that I could call on constantly. So that's where it is now, and yeah, who knows what will emerge from that. But I think it's truly this sense that these external things are such incredible games to play to facilitate a deeper game which is happening internally. If the external game is not tethered to something internally, it's, in my sense, sort of meaningless, because I think our parents and our grandparents in Ireland, because there was certainly not much of a distinction between the haves and the have-nots. Pretty much 98% of the population was a have-not up until not that long ago. So their driving force was to create some comfort in life. That's what they needed to do, because there was a huge amount of unpredictability. A lot of there wasn't comfort, there wasn't ease in the way that life was being lived. So I feel as though I am extremely blessed to be born into a time of life where we weren't rich by any means. I was raised by a single mother. She had no education beyond the age of 14, but she found her way. But she definitely made our lives far more comfortable than what she had. So that gave us the space and the allowance to sort of uncover who we really were and what was really, to let go of a lot of the burdens that we had inherited. And that creating a meaningful life was not just in ticking all of the material boxes, moving through all of the material planes of life, the job, the savings, the car, the house, the wife, the kids, the holidays. Those things suddenly seemed like they were meaningless because we had tasted some of them from an earlier age. So I think for those who don't get that, and they get brought up in an environment where there's a lot of deprivation, a lot of poverty, to arrive to a point where you can create some comfort and stability is a huge, huge, huge monumental point of development. And then the next generation that get that, hopefully they can use that foundation of some stability and comfort to then start creating something that's much more aligned and concrete and pure. And I sort of feel that those are the blessings that I've been given because of the upbringing that I was given.
This sense of resting in yourself, and maybe alluding to the fact that sometimes it can be fleeting or whatever else, but just the moments of contact with that sense of rest within yourself. What does that kind of informed you over, given you a sense of?
I might answer that question with the opposite of what I see in many others, because in HARA, within the workshops, because I can connect to this because this was what lived in me. So I do some keynote speaking, but then we also have our inner circle within HARA. But then also in between that are sometimes workshops that I will do, oftentimes with more of a corporate audience or entrepreneurs. And many times the beginning of it is just to stand with our eyes closed for 3 minutes, no longer than 3 minutes. By the last 30 seconds, people seem to find some peace in it. But the first 2.5 minutes are pure turmoil and discomfort. And that is the primary experience that emerges when the individuals who engage in these workshops, which I think are really a map for the majority of people, when they just stand in their own body and close their eyes, where their eyes and the vision is not being drawn to things outside of themselves, but they actually get to feel what's happening inside. I use this because it's a great place to begin from, to say, if that is what you're experiencing inside, we can really see how that is driving so much of your behavior. the chaos that you're coming to me complaining about is not really about the external chaos, because the external chaos is only a mirror to the internal chaos that's being felt inside. I'm feeling all of this internal chaos, so I need even a more heightened and extreme external chaos, which will mute and override what I'm feeling internally. I felt that myself. I was going through the exact same thing. So this capacity to be able to rest in yourself in all sorts of environments, when you're in periods of uncertainty, periods of pain, periods of loss, periods of grief, periods of fatigue, then you can check in and see what's really needed and what is really needed in this moment. And you can hopefully make the right move at the right time. Whereas what I see in so many others is that they never give themselves an opportunity to stand in that space. They don't even know that it's an option. And consequently, they will go out trying to find solutions or distractions to the internal chaos that's being felt, which creates more chaos, more confusion, more disconnection. But if we can find that it's okay to stay with that messiness, that clutter for 2.5 minutes, then within the next 30 seconds, you're going to find that things sort of like thread themselves together and you'll get an insight into what's really happening inside. But if we don't, we'll expect that the therapist will help us, that the medications will help us, that the podcast will help us, that the triple espresso will help us. And it just simply won't. Now, there's no issues in any of those things. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with them, but it's just, how are we arriving to them? Are we arriving to them because we're feeling all of this pain and suffering inside, but we don't want to acknowledge it? And we're expecting that some outside body, some outside source is going to provide us with the answers. I did that myself for a long time. And I saw that nobody was really going to be able to provide the insights. They could provide a little path for a moment, a little vignette. But I had to learn how to do it for myself. I had to learn how to become curious and observant of my own inner nature, my own way of being.
For your perspective, like, because for me, I think a big part of that is, when you mentioned the idea again of letting go of the games, even that we may play between each other, amongst each other. I think there's almost such a vocabulary. There's so many mechanisms to let go of in terms of just being able to bear witness to what you are experiencing, like what you may have done in life, what you're maybe even presently doing in life, that comes with almost almost like an inherent kind of like position of judgment that most people can't even begin to look at themselves, because the moment you say I was judgmental, therefore I'm bad, like, it's almost this binary thing, which most things that just end up making you quite human, like they end up also making you bad. So it's almost hard to handle that white heat of observation. And then that energy is almost channeled into just not sitting with that. What's your kind of take then, in just even your own experience or with others, of just like bringing people almost down to terra firma to go, look, this is okay. This is actually this is quite normal, and it's okay. Like it's also quite normal to hold shame for like that goes unexamined. Like how do you kind of, even for yourself or others, how do you observe that process?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked this question. It's so important. I of course have still many, many, many self-destructive tendencies. Still.
Amen.
Yeah. My
Same.
my my way of responding to that in the past would have been wanting to like rectify it by doing the extreme opposite. So it could mean that I was trying to be healthy and I wasn't going to eat. I have this sort of like mental map of foods that I shouldn't eat. But then I go and I allow myself to have one, and suddenly I indulge for the whole afternoon in eating a whole series of these things. Too much coffee, too much pastries, ice cream, the whole lot. And then I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to fast tomorrow, and I'm going to vindicate all of the efforts of today. And that just creates this really extreme seesaw where what that would create in me, that I'd get like a day or two where maybe I found some balance, but then I would tip back into extreme tendencies and then extreme efforts to rectify it. So a huge turning point was releasing the judgment around all of that and saying, where does this come from? Like, what am I holding back on myself? What am I limiting? What am I denying myself of? What do I really want? What's a true basic need that's here? And when you start to look at it that way, you can end up feeling immense compassion for yourself. You can end up feeling immense compassion because you realize, wow, God, I just wasn't being met in this way, or I wasn't giving what I really needed to myself in this space or this space. I think urban landscapes can draw out the most self-destructive tendencies within us. Especially I think about a city like New York, because there's often not the space to really feel connected to others. So there's a lot of just passing by each other constantly, or having to bring some sort of value to transact with a person when you meet them. I'm so blessed to live here in Santa Fe, and I have an amazing partner and amazing dog, and life feels very good and it feels very connected. But I will notice it in myself sometimes when I go and I travel and I'm staying in hotels and I'm on my own and I'm in sort of cities and I don't know anybody there, and I'm there for 2 days and I have to figure out what I'm going to do and how I'm going to spend my time. For me, so often I will like turn toward food as a way to sort of feel some sort of like nourishment and connection inside myself. Sometimes that happens and it's fine. I'm just eating a bit more food than I would usually. Sometimes I'm indulging in things which probably aren't great for me. But I try not to judge myself for doing that. I try just to recognize, like, what do you need here, Patrick? Okay, so I was a little unaware today, but let's bring that sort of awareness into tomorrow so that I don't have to go and overindulge or eat a ton of snacks because I'm trying to fill some sort of a sense of emptiness that I'm feeling in this city that's full of people, but I don't feel connected to anybody. So that's helped me immensely, and it's helped a lot of people in HARA as well. There was a gentleman that I've done a lot of work with, and for him, porn was a huge outlet. But he hated it. He hated that it was an outlet. He hated that that's where he would turn to as a way to... He didn't even know why he turned to it. So we started looking at, like, so what's the feeling in you before you end up going to porn as an outlet? What's happening in you? What are you feeling inside your own body? And oftentimes it was feelings of immense frustration, of a buildup of tension, of a sense of great confusion. But it also was mirrored by this feeling that I cannot leave. I need to stay. I need to get this thing done. I need to get this task done. I need to hit this goal, this target. So I'm feeling all of these things which are saying, oh, I need to stop for a moment. I need to take just a quick time out. But then there's also, that's coming up from the body, but from the mind, it's saying, no, 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 no. Don't stop. We need to get through this. And there's this huge chasm between what the body is expressing, what the mind is saying. And out of that comes this sort of reactive response to go towards porn as a way to get some sort of physical release. Once we were able to notice and distinguish that those were the patterns that were taking place, it was much easier to rectify it. There was much less there wasn't like an intent to say, no, porn's bad. No, it was more about like, this is going to arise again and again and again. So do I have different ways to treat this feeling in my body? Do I have different options of how I'm going to respond to it? Sometimes it's to literally stop working for a while. Sometimes it's just to go outside and take a walk. Sometimes it was certain breathing patterns that were needed. But those give us the liberty of choice. And it took me a while to get to that point, because I was extremely judgmental on myself of the things which were good and bad, the shoulds and should nots, and that really limits growth. It limits lasting change.
I think it doesn't allow much space for curiosity, right? Like, and then within that as well, because man, I could repeat verbatim what you said about food, snacking, exercising, binge eating almost, then fasting. Like, one morning I turned around to my missus a few years ago and I said, I must be the only fucker in the world who's eaten this much, whatever pizzas it was, cereal, who's getting up at 6 a.m. to do 2 hours in the gym and then may fast that day. Like, this isn't a health advice, obviously, for anyone, but you know what I mean? Like, just thinking, like, what is going on? And it was just, as you say, like an aversion to a feeling, or not wanting to relate or connect with a feeling of some sort, and then punishing myself on the other end to say that I must rectify this, as if life is this kind of constant like debit and credit book that I have to balance at the end of every day. And I don't know about you, but for me in those days, what felt most punishing is the idea, and it wasn't even like absolute perfection or something like this, but like, let's just say if there was a day where I've outlined all these things that I think are most beneficial to me, I just have to mess up on one of them to say that that's ruined the day. Like, and I think we also do this a lot with emotions. Like, that if you have an outburst, or if you have something, we pass on the same judgments to our emotions. Then, like, if you had an argument with someone, that would ruin a whole day. That concept to me at this point is utterly bizarre. Like, because it's the judgment of the act that kind of fixes that or paints the whole color of the day. Whereas now I could have an argument, whether it's with my missus or someone else, and if I'm accountable for it, if I'm connected to it, and if I acknowledge why it happened, we can still love each other. Like 5 minutes later, we can still embrace. We're not like at each other's throats for a day. And I think there's so much about what you're kind of pointing to is just a curiosity and observation that gives us a chance to just release, let go, like, and almost as you were saying earlier, just this kind of sense of resting into being, resting into yourself again, without this kind of hardened, calloused idea of where it should be, because it's almost assuming that it knows the answer before it even begins. And what I really like, that I just wanted to ask you kind of as one of the last questions, just this thing that you touched on at the start as well, just kind of pointing to the significance of doing work that wasn't filling you. It may have been effective. People could have said that they were getting something from it. I know all the corporations you worked with, you're having external success with it. And then almost this kind of, it sounds like this fusion of the heart, of a kind of an artistic way of living, of a curious, connected way of living, that you can kind of let go of that, what that function of work was for you, to realize that there's even a bigger integration to make, not just in a sense of being and who am I, but that kind of, that permeates through all of your life, not just kind of compartmentalized in different ways. Could you give me just even a sense of that shift from viewing work from one way to the way you're presently kind of exploring it?
Yeah, and I can share it with you, that a way that was reflected back to me just last week by an analyst. I just started doing this recently, of meeting a Jungian analyst every 2 weeks. It's been incredible. When I moved to New York when I was 21, and I moved there to pursue some burning passion that I had about food. I now see what it was. It was the capacity of food to tell stories, to like really tell in a way that even text and oral stories can't. There's a feeling that you can get when you really especially in New York. I mean, New York was incredible in that way. There was an Egyptian restaurant that I used to go to called Abu Kir in Queens. Just you could feel the culture of the experience. I could get a taste of what it must be like to be in Cairo by being in this restaurant, of the way that they were serving, of the experience of going up to order, the tables, the lighting, the way the food tasted. It was all just in that. And then once I left, I was back in Queens. I was back in New York City once I stepped outside that door. And I was always so fascinated about the 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 indescribable things that food can do to really portray something, if that's what it's intended to do, where it's holding itself to deep roots, deep traditions. Along that way, during my time there, I really wanted to create a pop-up restaurant, and I was close to it. I was in talks with Jemison to fund it, a pop-up restaurant of what Irish cuisine and Irish food would look like if the famine never happened. So if we never went through that period, what would our cuisine look like? Because I think there's a great reverence for drinking and how to approach drinking in our culture. But I think we're sort of savage like when it comes to food. We don't really have customs of how to be with each other around a table. We don't really slow down and have an appreciation for things when we're eating them. Uh, Honestly, in compared to other cultures, like there's not really a capacity to have like dinners and host people. Of course, there are some, but I mean en masse. It's not in the culture. We still hold an approach to food that's linked to the subsistence, eating as a way to just survive, and subsistence of it that I think emerged from the times of the famine. So the culture isn't there. Whereas there's people who will slow down, and the way that they'll drink a pint of Guinness and they'll enjoy it, and there's there's a real reverence for it. But there's really not for food in Ireland. So I wanted to explore this. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Irish, the heritage of Irish food, is that there's an incredible amount of wild food in the country, but there's pretty much no knowledge of that wild food, because during the time of the famine, it was one of the greatest displays of your poverty if you were out picking seaweed, if you were out picking wild garlic, if you were out picking wild rhubarb, um, sea vegetables, etc. It was showcasing that you didn't have land to toil. You didn't have crops in your acreage, your 1, 2, 3, 4 acres, and you were the ultimate peasant, essentially. So people didn't want to engage with the wild foods of the land because it was seen from a social perspective as peasantry. There was something much more dignified about having a plot of land and growing potatoes or cabbage or whatever it might be from there, or even having uh, animal stock if you did. So what was reflected back to me was my journey from that age of about 25, 26 was to learn the skills so that I could cultivate my acreage, so that I could cultivate the potatoes and the cabbage and things like this. But eventually I became dissatisfied with the nourishment that those 2 or 3 crops could provide to me. And I wanted to re-engage with what the wild land had to offer me. But to do that, I had to let go of all of the conceptual understandings of that I had of how to farm and how to engage in agriculture. And I had to re-engage with just observing the land, tasting things, learning where things live, and almost to become back to being a peasant idiot again. But that peasant idiot has a lot more wisdom to live in any inch of the land and understand how to find nourishment and well-being from it. The farmer only knows how to exist within that acreage that he or she has created, and how to extract some nourishment from it. As soon as you place them outside of that landscape, they're sort of lost. So I see that sort of journey is happening and what I was trying to do with the pop-up was essentially to bring that lineage back into Irish cuisine, because I saw how that happened in the Nordic food movement, how there was a huge appreciation for all of the wild food that was that had been left behind, to bring it back in. And that's what's made Nordic food essentially change the whole path of global gastronomy. It was used to be the heartbed was in Paris in France. Now the heartbed is probably in Copenhagen in Denmark. And that came from the Nordic Food Manifesto with Klaus Meyer and different people like that. But there's a narrative there that's linked to my own life and my own journey, I think, which is to come back to being the idiot peasant who can find nourishment in all aspects of the land. And I think I'm trying to do something similar in all aspects of life, so that, so that I don't only exist within the boundaries of my acred land.
This is that's such a gorgeous image, metaphor, whatever, like for the shift that you're describing, and it really speaks to me as well. This sense of, we seek comfort, even as you touched on earlier, like different generations were like sought comfort because comfort was the main thing that was absent. And now you have this sense of like, okay, well, what is a meaningful life? What's a good life? What fulfills me beyond just comfort? And then this lovely sense of, almost like as a farmer, like being mechanistic in ways and learning all the traits, and then realizing that can get you, it's good to know these things, but it can only get one so far. And there's almost a sense for me when I hear that, even if I just reflect on myself, it's like, okay, it's one thing to be able to think you can survive by getting, I think there's a couple of approaches. Like, first of all, I try to acquire as much as I can and think that will bring some sort of level of happiness. Now my focus is more, wow, like what are the least amount of things that I can feel I can subsist on? Or I don't mean this from a sense of scarcity, but just like boiling it down to like what really matters. Like even bringing it back to the very start with the question of who am I? And I guess a question that will come up for me that you even touched on, like that can disturb people if they don't know the answer to what do I actually want. So I think that was a gorgeous reflection, and just it seems like a fairly logical question to ask on the back of that. Then, what is a good life for you, Patrick?
I think a good life is a life that feels aligned and that really gets at that everything is part of the same ecosystem. Everything is an input that I receive from here is shaping what's happening over here. They're all woven in with each other. That there isn't this sense of a fragmentation, or how I hear some people speak about it, like buckets. Like I'm trying to keep this bucket full and this bucket full and this bucket full, but I often get that one full and then these ones are empty. I think that's something that I feel much, much, much more within me, that I'm being allowed to show up with the same essence in all areas of my life. Of course, as I think about the business that I'm building, I think about it in much more of the details and the elements than I would if I'm just sitting down and having a dinner with friends. So that the quality of my engagement will be somewhat different, but the essence of who I am can carry through in all those areas. I don't have to shift in and out of different ways of being in each space. That to me is a good life. That to me is something where all experiences feed each other and there's this real sense of alignment. And that's something that I feel so grateful to have cultivated, and something that I'm encouraging others to cultivate as well. Because through that, you feel a lot more vitality. You feel a lot more clarity. You feel a lot more conviction, a lot more discernment. And there's more of a feeling of being in one's life as opposed to trying to do the right thing, which is just a mental sort of concept of of how I prove myself to be worthy. I think once we bring that alignment into it, we feel that worthiness in all encounters.
It's rare that someone has given an answer that would align almost so much with my own, but that very much does, man. And you know, one thing I'd say as well, and I guess I wonder, is it the same for you as well? It's amazing that sense of conviction that comes from it, without actually even having necessarily absolute clarity, not only as to what the next step may be, but even what the final fixed image of that would look like. It's almost like a conviction in a sense of being, which then, as you say, you can find yourself in many situations, but almost like, I think, a conviction of who I am, or what my sense of being is, or what I know feels right or resonates with that. That, as you say, comes about through all this alignment. And the distinction as well, I think, is the separate buckets. It kind of speaks to even some of the language of fragmentation that you described at the very start, which I think what you're orienting towards, or pointing towards, is this is all an interplay. Like this, everything is, in relation to it all. We don't just get to choose if and when we're in relation to a specific part of ourselves. So look, Patrick, thank you so much for your time today, man. I've enjoyed this immensely. Again, there's a number of things that I'd like to pick up with you, maybe even in a
I love
personal
that.
chat again. I thought that concept of that question about what Irish cuisine would have been pre-famine it's a wild question to ask, just from the point of view of further conversation. But I'll just say, look, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. It's always a joy to speak with you, and I think the candor and the energy that you bring, there's no ego at the table. I don't feel that in the conversation we're having now. I don't feel it in the times where we've connected in the past, and that allows, in my way of showing up with you, to really just pour into this engagement and this encounter. And that's a rare thing, and it's a really, really beautiful and needed thing. So I hope the quality that you bring to these sorts of interactions is something that people can really see, that that's the real thing that's happening here. Whatever the answers are and the discussions are, I think it's the real quality that you bring, because I've seen that this is not some sort of a performative act of how you just show up for these interviews. It's you. So I'm very grateful that you're doing this and that you're sharing that with others.
Much appreciated, Patrick. Thank you very much for that.